What if you found out that you had a child you never knew existed? A child who had been living just miles away from you, unaware of your identity? Imagine the shock, the regret, and the deep sense of loss that would flood your mind. Ethan Walker, a successful millionaire, is about to face this very reality. One chance encounter with a woman from his past will shatter his world, unraveling secrets and igniting a quest to find the son he never knew. But the road to redemption isn't as simple as a few heartfelt apologies. Will Ethan be able to rebuild a relationship with a boy who has every reason to hate him, or will the wounds of the past prove to be too deep to heal? This story will leave you questioning everything about family love and second chances. Stay tuned to find out what happens next. The crisp autumn air cut through the bustling streets of Seattle, its chill a stark contrast to the warmth that emanated from the familiar cafe on 3rd Avenue. Ethan Davis wasn't typically one to run behind schedule, but today had been different. A late-night presentation had left him exhausted, and now with only 20 minutes before his meeting. His usual stop, the one that always had his coffee order waiting, was unexpectedly closed for renovations. The only thing he needed more than caffeine right now was a moment of normalcy, a brief pause in his chaotic life. With a glance across the street, he spotted a new cafe, a cozy, inviting space with soft yellow lights spilling out into the foggy morning. The sign read, "The Daily Grind Cafe," and despite the rush, Ethan didn't hesitate. He darted across the street, nearly colliding with a cyclist as he pushed through the cafe's door. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries hit him like a wave, comforting in its familiarity. The cafe was bustling but not overwhelming, just the kind of place where he could grab his drink and zone out for a moment. The soft hum of conversations provided a peaceful backdrop as he checked his phone, mentally going over his presentation one last time. As he stepped into the short line, Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the soft murmur of a barista's greeting. He barely noticed the woman behind the counter. At first, his mind too busy calculating the next steps in his meeting, but as he glanced up, his eyes froze. There she was. Behind the counter, wearing a green apron, was Olivia Carter, his ex-wife. Her auburn hair, once meticulously styled in elegant curls, was now pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked different, older, yes, but there was something else. A subtle joy in her face, something he hadn't seen in years, not since their divorce. It was unsettling. He blinked and did a double take, trying to ignore the surge of emotions rising in his chest. This couldn't be real. Ethan. Her voice, soft and unfamiliar, brought him back to the moment. She was standing right in front of him, holding a coffee cup, staring at him with wide eyes. It wasn't just the shock of seeing her again after 3 years. It was the overwhelming sense that this moment was more than coincidence. There were so many questions swirling in Ethan's mind, but none that he could voice. Olivia had been the one to ask for the divorce. She had been the one to walk away. So why was she here now? For a split second, neither of them moved. Then she broke the silence. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was tinged with surprise, almost disbelief, but there was no anger, just curiosity. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a small voice from the corner of the cafe. He turned and blinked. In a playpen, a toddler was standing, clutching the edge and babbling happily. The child had dark hair, messy in the front, much like Ethan's, when he didn't bother to get a haircut. The boy giggled, a sound so familiar, yet completely out of place in this moment. Then the toddler turned toward him, and it hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. The child's eyes, those same striking green eyes, stared right back at him. His heart stopped. "No." Ethan's voice was a whisper, barely audible, but it carried all the shock and disbelief he felt. The toddler smiled an innocent smile, completely unaware of the whirlwind of emotions his presence was causing. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not like this. Ethan's mind reeled. He could hear his own pulse thumping in his ears as the weight of what he was seeing sank in. The little boy. This child looked exactly like him. The same eyes, the same shape, the same mischievous glint. Is he? He couldn't finish the question. Olivia seemed to read his thoughts, her expression flickering with a mix of guilt and fear. She glanced toward the toddler, her lips tightening as she finally spoke. "Yes, Ethan, his name is Jack, and he's yours." The words hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. His knees felt weak. He had a son he hadn't known about. For 16 months, this child had been alive, living in the world, and he hadn't been there for any of it. Jack, his son. He had to sit down. He didn't trust his legs to hold him. Olivia, still holding his gaze, looked away. She seemed to shrink, her posture tight with the weight of what she had just revealed. The barista behind the counter cleared her throat awkwardly, and Ethan realized he had been standing there for too long without ordering anything. The reality of the situation, the truth of his son's existence, was too much for him to process. I didn't know. His voice was barely above a whisper, the enormity of what he was learning crashing down around him. Olivia stepped back, looking at him with a mix of regret and something else he couldn't quite place. You didn't know, and I didn't know how to tell you. You were too busy with your career, and when I found out I was pregnant, you were halfway around the world. Her words pierced through the haze in Ethan's mind. Singapore, that job had been the breaking point for them, hadn't it? The moment when everything had started to unravel. She was right. He had been too focused on climbing the corporate ladder to notice what was slipping away right in front of him. The tension between them felt like a wall built up by years of silence and unanswered questions. Neither of them had expected to be here together again in this cafe with their son standing just a few feet away. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was tight, struggling to keep it together. Why keep this from me? Olivia looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The pain in her eyes was undeniable. I didn't want you to be a part-time father, Ethan. I didn't want you to be a stranger to him. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. The truth was more painful than he could have imagined. He hadn't been there for his son, not when he was born, not when he took his first steps. He had missed everything. As he turned back to look at Jack, still playing with the blocks in the corner, something inside him shifted. The realization was overwhelming. This child wasn't a part of some past life he could ignore. This was real. This was his son, and he had to find a way to be part of his life. Ethan's world had already shattered once before, back when Olivia had left him. But this was something he couldn't even begin to process. The weight of the words she'd just spoken, the sheer impact of them, kept reverberating in his mind as he stood frozen in that cafe. His son. He had a son. But no, it wasn't just that. The little boy Jack wasn't just a child to be ignored. He was the living, breathing consequence of everything Ethan had turned his back on. And in that moment, the guilt flooded in, overwhelming him. I didn't want you to be a part-time father, Ethan. Olivia's words echoed in his mind. I didn't want you to be a stranger to him. Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, the pain of holding this secret for so long, written all over her face. It was clear she had made sacrifices, and some of those had been for the very son he'd never known. Yet here he was, standing before her, like a ghost from the past, a man who had once promised to be everything she needed and failed. A man who had been too caught up in the pursuit of success to be present for what? A career. The very thing that now felt hollow in the face of what truly mattered. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a soft giggle coming from the corner. He turned to look only to see Jack smiling up at him from behind his small block tower. His innocent eyes glinting with the same curiosity that Ethan remembered from his own childhood. How could he have missed this? How could he have not known? I need to see him. I need to be with him. Ethan blurted out before he could even think. His words, raw and desperate, hung in the air between them. Olivia, startled by the sudden urgency in his voice, nodded slowly. There was no denying it any longer. Ethan had a right to know his son, to be a part of his life. But her hesitation was palpable. She knew what it would mean for both of them to reopen these wounds. We can go to the park after work. I'll bring him, she said quietly, avoiding his gaze. Ethan didn't trust himself to speak again. The reality of the situation hit him harder than any business deal he'd ever closed. Nothing, absolutely nothing in his life had prepared him for this. His heart raced, his chest tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own failure crashing down on him. He had missed a lifetime of moments, every first step, every word, all of it. But it wasn't just about the past. Ethan couldn't stop the burning question that gnawed at him. Why had Olivia kept Jack from him? Why hadn't she reached out sooner? I don't understand. Why didn't you tell me? Ethan asked again, his voice shaking with a mix of frustration and sadness. Why keep him away from me? Why keep me in the dark? Olivia took a deep breath, gathering herself before she spoke. She looked at him now, not with anger, but with a deep, tired sadness. I didn't want to bring him into that world, Ethan. The world where you were always away, working distant, lost in your own success. I didn't think it was fair to him to have a father who would just show up every once in a while, like a stranger giving him false hope. She swallowed hard. He's my world now, and I didn't want you to come in and confuse that I wanted to protect him from all of this. She gestured vaguely to the cafe, to the city beyond, to everything that had happened between them. Ethan's chest tightened even further. The weight of the decision she'd made protecting her son from a man who had been too wrapped up in himself to see what mattered most pressed down on him. She had made the decision he hadn't been capable of making all those years ago when they were still together. The silence between them grew heavy and suffocating. Olivia's words lingered in the air, and all Ethan could do was stand there feeling every ounce of the regret and lost time he now couldn't take back. As he stared at her, the woman he once promised the world, he felt something shift inside him. There was no going back. The past was what it was, but there was a future, his future, and now it was tied to this little boy. Suddenly, the air in the cafe seemed too thick. The people around them seemed to fade into the background as Ethan's focus honed in on what mattered most. His son, Jack. He had to make things right. But where did he even begin? As the door to the cafe swung open, Ethan felt a strange shift, a reminder that the world was still turning. Outside, the sounds of Seattle rushed back in. His phone buzzed with an incoming call, but for once he didn't care to answer it. The world outside seemed irrelevant. His mind was consumed by the urgency of the situation before him. Olivia's voice broke through the haze. I didn't want to tell you this, Ethan, but now I have to. Her words were quiet, but forceful. I'm not sure you're ready for everything. There's more you don't know and some things I haven't told you. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? What else is there? Olivia looked at him, her face shadowed with a concern that immediately alarmed him. It's about Jack. It's not just about you and me anymore. There are other forces at play. Ethan. Her eyes flicked toward the door and Ethan followed her gaze. But all he could see was a small figure running past the cafe window, a figure that looked oddly familiar. For a second, he couldn't make out the details, but then the moment passed. What are you talking about? He demanded, his frustration growing. But before she could answer, Olivia was gone. She had turned and walked away, heading for the back of the cafe, leaving Ethan standing there alone again, with more questions than answers. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that everything he had built, everything he had worked for, didn't matter anymore. As he stood there watching Olivia disappear into the crowd, a sense of helplessness washed over him. The woman he once loved, the woman who had given him a son, had just walked away without answering his most pressing question. What was it that she hadn't told him? His mind raced as he stood in the cafe, the clink of coffee cups and the hum of conversation surrounding him, but none of it felt real. Everything was a blur. The only thing that was clear was the aching realization that he had missed out on so much time, so many chances, so many firsts. He couldn't get Jack's face out of his mind, the small child he had never known existed until today. How was he supposed to fix this? How could he undo years of neglect? But despite the uncertainty, Ethan knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this slip away. The next day, Ethan couldn't wait any longer. He called Olivia, his heart pounding in his chest. Olivia, I need to see him, he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and hope. Please, I need to be there for him. I want to be a part of his life. After a long pause, Olivia's voice came through soft but firm. You'll see him, Ethan, I promise. But you need to know it won't be easy. There's a lot you don't understand yet. I know, but I have to try for him. Ethan's voice was resolute. They arranged to meet at a park, a place that felt familiar to Ethan from his childhood. A quiet spot by the river away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Ethan arrived early, his heart in his throat. He had no idea what to expect, but he knew that nothing could be worse than not trying at all. When Olivia arrived, she was holding Jack's hand. The sight of the little boy with his bright eyes and shy smile hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He knelt down slowly, not wanting to overwhelm him. "Hey, Jack," Ethan said softly, his voice a bit shaky. "I'm your dad, Ethan." Jack looked up at him, tilting his head slightly as if trying to make sense of the stranger before him. Olivia stood off to the side, watching carefully as though ready to intervene if needed. For a moment, Jack just stared, then as if sensing something familiar, something that tied him to this man, he reached out. The tiny hand touched Ethan's face, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt like a father. Not in the way he had imagined it, with perfect plans and schedules, but in the raw, unspoken connection that had always been there. "Dad," Jack whispered, his voice small, but full of wonder. Ethan's heart swelled with a mixture of joy and sorrow. This wasn't how he had imagined it would happen. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy, but it was real. "Yes, buddy," Ethan whispered back. "I'm your dad." Over the next few weeks, things began to shift, slowly, painfully. But surely Ethan began to forge a relationship with Jack. It wasn't easy. There were moments when Jack didn't want to see him, when he pulled away unsure of who this man was, who was suddenly in his life. But Ethan didn't give up. He couldn't. Every weekend he met Jack at the park, took him to lunch, and spent time just talking. The boy was quiet but curious, and Ethan found himself answering questions he hadn't prepared for, questions about his life, about Olivia, about why he hadn't been around. It wasn't easy to face those questions, but he had no choice now. He had to be honest, even when it hurt. One day, after several weeks of spending time together, Jack turned to Ethan and asked something that stopped him in his tracks. "Why didn't you want to be my dad before?" Jack asked, his voice small but full of sincerity. Ethan had been waiting for this moment, the one where the truth had to come out. He had been afraid of it, afraid that his answer might drive Jack away. But now in the quiet of that park, there was no avoiding it. "I was lost, Jack," Ethan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I was so focused on other things that don't matter, that I missed everything that was important. I missed you." Jack didn't say anything for a long time, but then to Ethan's relief, the little boy reached out and grabbed his hand. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I'll try." Jack said, his words simple but powerful. Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. He didn't know if Jack would ever fully forgive him, but that moment, that tiny step forward, was enough. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he had a purpose again. He wasn't just a businessman chasing the next deal. He was a father, a man who had lost everything and was now trying to make it right. The days that followed were full of small victories. Jack started to open up, and Ethan learned how to be there for him in ways he had never known. He attended school events, helped him with homework, and spent quiet nights together talking about life. And with each passing day, their bond grew stronger. Ethan knew there was a long road ahead. The damage had been done, and Jack's trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But for the first time, he felt like he had a chance, like he could finally be the man he was meant to be. And then one day, as they sat on a bench together, Jack looked up at him and said something that Ethan would never forget. "I'm glad you came back, Dad." What do you think of Ethan's journey? Do you think he can truly make up for the lost time? Or do you believe some wounds are too deep to heal? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Also, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to share this video with your friends. And if you'd like to see more stories like this, comment 100 below. We'd love to hear your feedback and keep bringing you more heartfelt content.